Well, welcome to our Leadership Speaker Series. My name is Vikre. I'm Director of the Sandbulte Center for Ethical Leadership in the School of Business and Technology. This event is sponsored by the Sandbulte Center, and the center was created through a gift from Minnesota Power to honor its retiring chairman and CEO, Sandbulte. I'd like to welcome Joel and Emily Vikre. They're the founders and owners behind Vikre Distillery here in Duluth. Emily has a PhD in food policy and behavioral theory from Tufts University. She's a nationally recognized food and drinks writer. Joel's previous experience includes creating 2 nonprofits in Africa that fight HIV/AIDS and promote water sanitation. In September, Vikre was voted the #1 best craft specialty spirits distillery in the U.S. Congratulations on that. So Joel and Emily, thanks for speaking to our group today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Take it away, Joel.
Oh, all right. Yeah, we're happy to be here. We are going to probably not give the talk Rick expects us to give. We might not even give the talk we expect us to give, so we'll just see how it goes. But we did want to start by introducing ourselves. So, Emily, why don't you go first?
I grew up here in Duluth. I was born in the Twin Cities, but my family moved here when I was 4 years old. And so Duluth has always been home for me. Lake Superior, the horizon, ingrained in my psyche and my soul. And so even though I left Duluth when it came time to go to college, wound up on the East Coast, spent a million years in grad school, behind all of that, Duluth always kind of called to me, and Lake Superior was always beckoning me to come back. But I did I studied biology as an undergraduate and thought I wanted to be a scientist, but got very into science writing, and from science writing got into nutrition writing, and wound up in grad school studying food policy and behavior change and theories of behavior change for promoting healthy eating. And through doing this work, I started working with immigrant communities in the Boston area and doing community-based participatory research, which is a style of research where instead of the researchers coming up with a research question on their own, going into a community, studying them, leaving with the data, and the community never really benefiting from it necessarily, the researchers actually go into the community comes up with the research questions, helps structure the research so that it really reflects their actual lived experience, and then is able to make use of any data that comes out of it. So we did nutrition research with immigrant women, which was really cool. But sorry, everybody here, I didn't love academia. I was teaching graduate school classes to finish my PhD, and didn't really want to stay in the context where you have to publish all the time and you're building incremental research, and I didn't want to stay on the East Coast, so started thinking about what was something different that we could do. Meanwhile, Joel was following his own trajectory.
Yeah, I studied ecology in undergrad, and then I took a year off and lived in Mexico near a landfill, working with folks who actually lived on the landfill. They were like post hoc recyclers, kind of. And then I went to medical school, and I was there for 2 years doing medical school and a degree in public health. And then I took a year off to go to Kenya and help some friends start a hospital, and then I didn't come back. So I helped them sort of build a nonprofit to support that. It's now a regional hospital in Kenya with like 300 or 400 staff there. And then I got involved to help start another organization that was doing water, sanitation, and hygiene work. And then I went and worked for, to the extent that there is a man of the nonprofit world, I worked for the man of the nonprofit world, which was a big USAID-supported global health company. And it was not for profit, but it was big. It was like a $300 million a year organization with offices in 70 countries. And I helped lead their strategic planning process. And then I got more involved with other nonprofits and doing consulting. And what I would think about all the time was, if you have a social mission, how do you ensure that it happens? Because in organizations, the sort of fundamental incentives that drive the behavior of an organization are often different in nonprofits from what they're actually trying to accomplish. So you might be trying to improve health of children in Africa or something, but what drives you is, we have to keep our donors happy, we got to keep getting more money, we have to prove to this government or this organization that we're meeting their demands. And so figuring out how you align incentives so that what you say your mission is and what actually drives your organization are at least related to each other. But I had gone from like living in the village in a little hut and working with people directly to just wearing a suit and working on PowerPoint slides, and I wanted to do something more physically embodied. So Emily and I were here over New Year's and
visiting my parents
and
drinking whiskey.
Drinking whiskey. We were drinking a Swedish whiskey, and the story of the Swedish whiskey was that these Swedes had gone to Scotland. They had heard the Scots brag about their peat and their water and their barley, and they were like, "Those Scots, come on. Sweden is a more beautiful country than Scotland, and we have all those same things. We should make our own whiskey." So we were having the same conversation, drinking the Swedish whiskey. We were like, wait a minute.
Dawned on us.
Yeah.
Minnesota has all these things. We have the best water in the world. Duluth is situated on Lake Superior, which scientists actually call glacially distilled from the glacier water is so low in minerals. We grow a lot of the country's grains. A lot of the country's brewing grains are malted here. There are barrels that are made in Minnesota. The woods are full of natural resources, and nobody was making whiskey in Minnesota. And so this idea came to us at this dinner, and we couldn't shake it. We were like, somebody has to do this. It was like a muse captured us, and there wasn't necessarily like logic or a business model or anything, or just like, this has to happen. And so we went back to Boston and started figuring out how
Right.
to do it.
So because of our background, we couldn't help but thinking about, how do you start a business, particularly one that's making booze, which is not necessarily the most ethically positive thing just on its own. How would you do that in a way that was positive and that contributed positively to the environment and to culture, as well as making a profit? So we started thinking about the way that we think about things, which is models and diagrams and strategies. So we're going to draw one on the board.
We're going to draw our logic model. It's not super academically rigorous, but...
No, we just made it up this morning.
But we swear it was in our heads the whole time. But, so we started with kind of the idea of place, and the idea that a business could be rooted in a place and expressive of that place. And especially for me, Duluth is home. Duluth feels like home. Lake Superior is my spiritual guide. And so we knew we wanted our company and our brand to honor this place and to evoke this place. And then place is also related to the people here. So we wanted to figure out how could our business have a kind of a social mission besides giving people tasty things to drink. But be a really positive part of the community, a place where people can gather, a business that supports other things that are going on in the community and supports the thinking that's happening here. And how could we build a business that supports the people working there? And then even though both of us come from a nonprofit background, we also had to figure out how can this be a functional business that makes money? And so with those three things in mind, we did some research and we discovered that there is a movement among some businesses to become what's called triple bottom line businesses. And so you write into your bylaws that people, planet, and profit all weigh equally in your decision making, and the board has to take them into account in decision making if you have a board of your company. And it was something that we brought to all of our investors when we started raising money. We said, this is going to be a triple bottom line company. And we believe...
So the triple bottom line, people, profit, and planet, those were our values going in. And we knew we want to make them rigorous. So like Emily was saying, like a nonprofit, we want to say, we're out there to save kids. But actually what we're out there to do is satisfy our donor base. And it's hard to do both at the same time. We wanted to say, how do we get the place the money comes from aligned with these values. And so we wrote into our bylaws that people, profit, and planet all should matter to the board of the company. So what we're trying to do there is structure the incentives that run the business rigorously in a way that would support people, profit, and planet.
Keep talking.
Keep talking? All right. So, incentives, we needed to raise money, and we already had a thing that's not super attractive to donors, which is like, or to investors, we're going to start a company that values the planet and people in addition to profit. So what we did was, we thought, how can we get folks who want to invest in this, that we will eventually make them some money, but also care about our values? And so instead of going to people with tons of money, we went to people with some money. And we said, hey, would you like to buy a small part of this idea that we have for a relatively reasonable amount of money? And the way that we're going to ensure that we maintain your interests while serving people, profit, and planet is that we're going to take exactly the same type of ownership that you have. So we sold half the company, we own half the company, but everyone else has the same kind of ownership in the company that we do. So if we ever want to take some money out and not be poor anymore, they get to take money out too. If we decide, hey, we think we should keep reinvesting and growing the company, then that's what happens to them also. Their money keeps getting reinvested and growing the company. So we aligned our interests in that way. We did the same thing in aligning our interests with our employees. So we said, we're going to have the same benefit package that you have. We're going to have the same salary that you have. We're going to make sure that, if we want to do a nice thing to make our lives good and our jobs enjoyable, that they get that also. Mm-hmm. So those two things, the values and the incentives, they kind of inform each other. And then when it comes to how do we make this thing go, how do we make it make an impact in the world and make a profit and serve the planet and people well, that's where you get into the strategies. How are we going to approach this? How are we going to solve the problem? And that strategy for us is an iterative process. So especially when you're a startup, you can't afford to make a 5-year strategy and put it on the wall and just, check back on it every year. Like, things are changing every month, sometimes every week. So we think of it more as a process, and no kind of strategy document ever gets much past a draft. But every few months, we get all of our people together and we go away from the distillery for a little bit and we say, how are we doing on this? What has changed? How do we need to adapt in order to continue to be successful and to advance our values?
Mm-hmm. And kind of like this, where everything is informing everything else, we always set up our strategy as kind of cyclical as well. So we divide it into product, brand, I'm totally forgetting. Sales, and...
Nope, it's
what is it?
It's process.
Process, yeah.
It goes like this.
Neither of us can remember.
Resources.
There we go.
Craft. Brand. And sales. And then in the middle we put systems. So this is more like down at a lower level, like what are we going to do this month, this year? This is kind of how we think about it. So what are the resources that we use and how can we steward them wisely? What do we then do with those resources to produce our product? How does our product live in the world and impact people? How do we sell that product? And then how do those sales revenues get more resources and continue around? So everyone who works for us is probably tired of circles, but we think it's wise to think in
Everything
circles.
is interconnected. It's an ecosystem approach to all of our thinking.
So that is the... So we have these three things that inform each other: values, incentives, and strategy. And those things together are essentially the culture of our business. Okay, so and it bears thinking about culture. If you want to carry something out that's more complex than we're just in this to make money, you got to have people who care about the same things you do, and you got to have incentives that are going to push them to do the things you want them to do. And so
we've been very intentional kind of in building our culture and thinking about it in the way that we model to our employees. Obviously, the incentive structures that we've set up, the way we communicate, and even the way we hire, the way we do the strategic planning. And so when we've been hiring people, instead of just looking for people who have like content expertise for the job that we need to do, we look at is this person an active learner? Are they a communicator? Do they want to participate in something that has these social goals as well?
Are they loyal?
Are they loyal? Will they be in something that's kind of for the long run? And so finding people like that who are willing to learn along with us and participate in the process, and then training them in the job more so than taking someone from outside and who is going to tell us what to do, basically. And we've also tried to really foster a culture of very open and kind of horizontal communication where there aren't decisions being handed down from on high and people are expected just to do them. We include people in our decision making, and people can always come to us and give us their feedback and know that we will listen and we will respond to that, and things may or may not happen, but we're always open to engaging in conversations.
So we think of our staff as kind of being like a family, where, you know, we're all in it together, we're all talking to each other, we're all after the same things, and also at the end of the day, there's a mom and a dad who might tell you what to do. So it's collaborative, and it's a group process, and it's iterative, but it's also, we try to avoid the trap that particularly nonprofits get into, where then nothing ever gets decided or done. Yeah. So that's like the sort of theory of how thinking about these three things, our values, our incentives, and our strategy, makes up our culture as an organization, which then shapes the brand of Vikre Distillery, the product that's out in the world, how people interact with it. So now we want to share three examples with you and get concrete about it. One is a relatively straightforward, successful example.
Where everything aligned really nicely.
One is a complicated example where things didn't align very easily. And the third is a failed example where we haven't been able to get them to align at all. So I'll do the first one. You do the second one?
Sure.
So the first one, the main energy that a distillery, or the main sort of use of energy of a distillery, is cooling water. We have, what we're basically doing is boiling stuff and then cooling it back down into a liquid over and over and over again. So we're running tons of cooling water all the time. It's like about 90 gallons a minute. And so that uses a lot of energy to cool it down. When we started, in order to save on equipment costs, we just used city water. So we'd run the city water through the condensers, one after the other, and down the drain, and we were using hundreds of thousands of gallons every month. So we said, all right, we got to fix this. The easy way to fix it is to install a big electric chiller. So this would be like a 50-ton chiller, just running a compressor all day and all night to cool down water. But we thought, we live in Duluth. It's stupid to use energy to cool stuff down. It's cold most of the time anyway. So we worked with a few different people. We worked with a group of students. We worked with some engineers out at NRRI, and we found an engineer we could pay in whiskey. And we designed a system that most of the time just uses the cold weather that we have in Duluth to cool down that water. And so in that case, our values, we wanted to value the environment, use our resources wisely. It was obvious we need to reduce our water use and our energy use. Our incentives, our short-term incentive was like, well, we might as well just keep using city water because it's cheaper than putting in a whole new system. But we didn't have to look very far out, about a year out, to where it would actually be cheaper to have the system in place. So that aligned nicely. So then the strategy was, and then from a strategic point of view, doing things that are good for the environment is good for our brand. That's one of the sort of hallmarks of who we are, is we're of this place and we care about it. We want to do right by it. And so all three things, values, incentives, strategy, they align. We put in the system, and it's great. It runs the waste heat over and heats up our barrel room, and then it goes up to the roof, and it just dissipates in the air without a lot of energy use, comes back, and we run it through again. So that's the first example, the easy one.
So yeah, how much water are we saving now?
We reduce our water use by over 80%.
So huge. And we also got to fairly quickly see our water bill go down, which was very gratifying. So it was definitely...
That was how we measured it.
Yeah, so it's very win-win type of situation. So the next example was a situation where the path to figuring out how these different things aligned was a little bit more complicated. And it starts with understanding kind of craft distilling as a phenomenon and as a brand proposition and a value proposition. And craft distilling, people think, is following somewhat the craft beer trajectory. And so 20 years ago, craft beer didn't really exist and came onto the scene. It started bit by bit chipping away, and of course in the last decade or so we've seen it really take off. Craft beer is now like 15% of beer consumption in the country, which still sounds really low probably to people living in Duluth where there's craft beer everywhere, but it's just seen this huge trajectory. And craft spirits looks like it's following behind, about like 20 years behind, but it's poised to take off as craft has become an interest of the market. But what does craft mean in distilling? It's kind of a complicated question. With craft beer, you're either like Bud Light, Coors, or you're craft. There's really big companies, and then the craft companies differentiated themselves by taste, by being independently owned, by using different brewing technologies, basically, and doing it by hand. And distilling
mostly by being small.
But mostly by being small. With distilling, there's a lot more variety. There's big distilleries that do stuff with great craft and do it by hand. There are little distilleries that aren't taking care. There's people who buy stuff and just put it in their own bottle and don't do anything to it but sell it. And so there are all these cloudy, murky definitions. And so when we came into this, one of our value was making things ourselves and doing it by hand. We wanted to be craft. And we started by having a partnership with Bent Paddle, where they, because with distilling you start by fermenting something, it's very similar to making beer, then you distill it, which is separating it by boiling points, and then you age it if it's whiskey, gin, vodka, things like that aren't aged. And so we partnered with Bent Paddle to use their fermentation equipment, and they were sourcing the grains for us. We were doing fermentation over there, and then we were doing all the distilling in-house. And over the course of the first year and a half of doing this, we discovered it was really, really, really expensive to do it this way, even though we valued that partnership. We valued all this process. And so we thought, how do we deal with this? We can raise our prices to make up for the fact that it's really expensive to do it this way. We can try to educate people so that they will still accept something that's that higher price. Or we can try to figure out how to reduce our materials cost. And so we started by trying to raise our price and educate people. And talked a lot about what we were doing, but the market just wasn't supporting that price. And we didn't see an increase in sales, and we're not having great success. And I started doing some more research and actually did some writing. This is how I got into the whole like murky water of what is craft. And learned that with things like gin and akavit and what we make, the part of the process of making the base, which is a neutral spirit, is more chemistry than it is craft. And the craft is really in making the flavor profiles of the botanicals that you're infusing in there. Whereas with whiskey, the brewing and the cuts in the whiskey making are more the part of the craft. And so I'm totally losing my train of thought.
Okay, well, even historically, if you go to London, where all the great makers of London dry gin are, they don't make it from scratch. In fact, they're not allowed to make it from scratch. They all use a neutral spirit that they source from a distillery, and then they do the blending. And we had been trying to tell people, it's made from scratch, but when you look at it on the shelf, you can't tell which ones are made from scratch and which ones aren't, unless you really know what you're looking for. And nobody seemed to care.
Then we also started doing some more research and looking at how much energy it was taking to do it from scratch on our equipment versus equipment that's specifically made for making a neutral base. And we discovered that actually we were wasting a lot of energy, we were wasting more water, and by sourcing through bent paddle, the grain was coming from all over the place. Sometimes it was coming from Minnesota or Wisconsin, sometimes it was coming from Canada, but sometimes it was coming from China or Russia, and the company that we were getting it from couldn't tell us what was what and when it was coming from where. And so we started doing some more research and discovered that there was a distillery in southern Minnesota that has neutral spirit equipment, so it can make it very efficiently, and they source everything from Minnesota family farms using organic Minnesota corn. And they actually use the corn cobs as biofuel to run their equipment. And so they're making this neutral spirit very efficiently and in a very sustainable way. And it's from Minnesota and is organic, which is very aligned with our values. And it was also cheaper than doing the whole process in-house by ourselves. And so we did a lot of talking, a lot of thinking, like, what do we value more, really? Do we value stewarding every single part of the process in our space, or do we value that commitment to the planet and to also being a profitable and sustainable business? And we decided that for making our gin, the things where the craft is really in the flavor coming from the botanicals, we felt better about buying a neutral spirit that is distilled in Minnesota from organic Minnesota corn more efficiently, and then redistilling it and using our botanicals than we did about getting grain from who knows where and using all that energy to make it ourselves. And this also freed up money for then starting to partner with local farmers to get whiskey grains. So we can now get our whiskey grains and do that whole process in-house, getting our grains from locally laid and from the food farm.
But meanwhile, we had spent 1.5 years or 2 years telling everybody it has to be made from scratch or it's not craft. And so we had to go back to them and say, actually, we've thought about this again, and we think we were wrong, and here's why. So if you think about the model here again, our values stayed the same. We want to grow the stuff in the most sustainable way we can and distill it in a sustainable way. We also want to make money. But the incentives got pretty complicated because the materials cost was too high. And it was driving our price up. And then from a strategy point of view, it was like, well, do people care about this or not? Is this part of what makes craft or not? And regardless of what we believe, what do other people believe? So we switched to that. We immediately started actually making money, which was a nice change for our business. And it turned out no one cared. So it was a lot of soul searching for us and for our staff, but in the end, the people were like, "Oh, it's organic now? Oh, it's gluten-free now?" And that was what they cared about.
But we probably wouldn't have done it if it didn't also align with our values.
Right. So that's the second example. The third example is our failure example. So we're not allowed to sell our product directly, with the exception of cocktails and some small bottles. We have to sell to distributors. Distributors are like an old, sort of stodgy industry that is sort of the modern incarnation of the mob. A lot of those...
Basically, all the distributors that exist now started the day after Prohibition ended. And
all
they
the big
haven't
ones,
changed.
Anyway. Yeah, they all have this story like, we were started by a man with a wagon the day that Prohibition ended. It's like, well, what was on the wagon the day before Prohibition ended? They were all rum runners, and they were the wealthy families, and they still are. So anytime we get into distribution, suddenly we're in murky territory with values. We're also in murky territory with strategy because they have a lot of power and control. And then with incentives, we're in murky territory because the way that our industry traditionally works is with payoffs and kickbacks and whatnot. And nowhere is that more true than in Chicago. In Chicago, if you want to get your gin on a menu at a bar, what you're supposed to do is you go, you have a drink, talk to the bartender, and you say, hey, what do you think about picking up my gin here? And then you leave a $1,000 tip. And that's how you get your gin placed at a bar. Well, we don't have a lot of money to leave $1,000 tips, nor does it really align with our values. But meanwhile, we wanted to sell our product in Chicago because one of our values is profit, and we got to sell this stuff if we're going to make a profit. So we were looking around at what distributors are there in Chicago, and there's always a trade-off from a strategy point of view between a small distributor that has high-end accounts and can really devote attention to your product and sell it one at a time, versus a big distributor that actually has a lot of accounts.
But also has a huge portfolio of all the spirits that they sell, so you're buried amidst 55 other gins.
Right, so it's like attention without a lot of potential, or a lot of potential without a lot of attention. So we decided in Chicago to sort of split the difference. We went with a large distributor that had a craft division. The idea being, well, they can give us some attention, but they also have a lot of market power. So if it goes well, they can get us into every liquor store in the state. But it didn't work. So let me look at my note here. The other thing we were trying to do in Chicago, besides sell our product, was we're trying to figure out what's our value proposition beyond our home market. So a big part of the value of craft that people are buying is local, right? Like everybody loves their local beer. Like if we lived in Chicago, would we love Bent Paddle? Well, sure, it would be a great beer, but we'd probably love our Chicago beer more, right? So local is a big part of the value proposition, and we had a lot of success in Minnesota and at least northwest Wisconsin, but we didn't know to what extent is our product great and the story is awesome versus to what extent is it like, hey, that's made in Duluth. We live close to Duluth. So one of the big things we're trying to figure out in Chicago is what's our value proposition when we're far away from home? What do people value about our product in terms of how it's made, how it tastes, how it looks, the story that it evokes versus just it's made in Duluth. So we were trying to figure that out. We're trying to sell our product, and we're trying to come up with a deal with the distributor where they would have capacity but also pay some attention to our product. So we made a deal with a company that was called Works Beverage, which is, they were at the time, I think, the 5th biggest distributor in the country. But they had a craft team that was 5 people that was going to be really dedicated to our product.
And we had heard good things about them, kind of sussed out the situation. So we put a lot of effort into getting onto their radar, getting meetings with them, coming up with a strategy for working with them. And like the week before we were going down to meet with the whole craft team and present our launch strategy, Wirtz announced that they were merging with another large distributor to become the 2nd largest distributor in the country, and their new name was Breakthrough. And so they were changing, when we arrived, they were changing over signs, and all these new people were coming, and nobody was sure about their jobs. And that, 2 days before we got down there, another one of the large distribution companies in the Chicago area folded. And so suddenly there were hundreds of thousands of different accounts and different spirits in their portfolio that were up in the air. And so the 2 big remaining distributors who were there were sitting down and dividing up that portfolio.
It was like a super mob thing. I was in a conference room with there was one guy from Breakthrough and there was one guy from the other big distributor in Chicago. And they were on the phone with different people, and they were talking to each other. And they were like, "All right,
that?
well, we'll have Eagle Rare. Do you guys want Svedka?" And it was like it was just Influencepeddling was how they were dividing this stuff up. Anyway, and we had spent about a year developing a relationship with the guy who was the head of the craft team. And it was hard to get his attention, but he was smart. He was like a strategic guy. I had to drive to Chicago and show up at his office to get a first meeting with him, because otherwise he would just ignore us. And I just showed up and I told the secretary I had a meeting with him. And she was like, okay, great, well, he's not here. So I waited for an hour and he showed up. And then he just acted like, oh yeah, we have a meeting scheduled, of course.
So business tips. Just show up.
Yeah, so anyway, about a month after we started out in the market, he left the company. So there goes all our effort to develop this relationship. First, the company's gone, and then the person we worked with is gone. And that all happened this spring. And since then, we're now in a book in Chicago. So if you talk to a bar or a liquor store, you can say, oh, you can order it from Breakthrough. But Breakthrough hasn't done a thing for us. So we have sent our sales team down there, and they go out and they visit bars, and they're trying to get us placed into Whole Foods. But trying to kick off a product when all you've got is people who live in Duluth who can drive there and hang out for a week at a time is not a recipe for success. And that's where we are right now with that. So big, hairy problem, complicated incentives, trouble figuring out what's a good strategy. And so far, the cycle
We just
is
keep
not
kind of
working.
showing up in Chicago and saying, we're here. We have a meeting with you.
Yeah.
So if anyone has any suggestions
Yeah,
or ways of thinking about it.
So I guess we would start with a question for you, which is taking that situation in Chicago and knowing kind of, or at least having a little bit of a sense of what our values are and how we've approached it so far. What do we do next?
I have one question before I have a suggestion. Why can't you, the producer, distribute? I don't know what the history of that element is.
So at the end of Prohibition, they were trying to satisfy the temperance movement, that they were going to be able to start back up alcohol production and sales without society going to hell, basically. Because it was, at that time, it was a moral thing, right? Like, liquor is bad for society. It makes people behave poorly and do stupid things. It's not a good idea. And one of the things that was happening before Prohibition that everyone was most scared of is almost exactly what we do now. It was called a tied house, where they made the alcohol and they served it right there in place. And these were like really considered dens of sin. And a lot of them, I'm sure, were. So they had to satisfy the people who had supported Prohibition that this new system was going to be well controlled and well regulated. So they split it into three parts. It's called the three-tier system. So there's suppliers, manufacturers, like us. There are distributors, and then there are retailers, which would be liquor stores, bars, restaurants. And so they made all these rules, and it varies state to state. But essentially, if you're a manufacturer, you're not allowed to distribute, and you're not allowed to retail. If you're a retailer, you're not allowed to distribute. If you're a distributor, you're not allowed to manufacture. And they check to make sure that there's no ownership in common. I can't have my brother start a distributor. Emily and I can't say, all right, Emily owns the distillery, Joel owns the distributor. They check that. So that's the rule. And it varies a little state by state, and there are some exceptions for for mostly breweries and wineries. But that's basically the sort of rubric that we're under.
Yeah. That part needs to change. You're young enough.
Right to your legislators.
Yeah.
What's the contractual relationship between a supplier and a distributor? I mean, what are you locked in?
So this
That
also
also
varies
varies.
by state. So some states are called franchise states. Wisconsin is an example, where if I'm a distributor and I sell Bacardi, no one else is allowed to sell Bacardi. And if Bacardi wants to get away from me and go to another distributor, they can't. there's like just an insane legal hurdle that no one is ever able to overcome. So that's true in some states. We're looking at getting into Georgia. Once we ship a single order to Georgia, we're locked in with the distributor we chose forever.
Yeah, and that's not even just an insane legal hurdle. Like somewhere in Wisconsin, and this is true in Minnesota also, if you sign certain types of contracts, a different distributor can buy you out by paying for a certain number of years of like lost profit that the distributor that's selling calculates. In Georgia, that's not even an option. If you're in with a distributor, it is permanent.
So in Minnesota, there are franchise laws for beer, but not for spirits. But the distributor, we said, hey, we're going to make a product and it's going to be really good. Will you distribute it? And they're like, right, okay, but you got to sign this deal with us that says if you ever want to switch distributors, your new distributor has to pay us 2 years of what we project the profits would be and buy back all our stock. Which is a big hurdle to overcome.
Some states you don't have to sign deals, in which case then you can switch distributors more easily, but you're always looking at that similar situation where you're getting on their radar, building a relationship, trying to find where you fit in a portfolio. And distributors are definitely kind of the bottleneck in the system where there's a lot of producers, some big, some small. There's a lot of consumers, and there's a few distributors that are picking and choosing. It's a very interesting situation to be in.
What are your geographic opportunities? You mentioned Chicago, and I sort of go, but what about Seattle? Like where there are young entrepreneurs like yourself that are like you fighting the same fight.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when we think about what markets do we want to grow into, we're considering a bunch of things. One of them is just the distributor. Can we get a relationship with someone we like who's going to care about our product? One of them obviously is the consumer. What's the size of the market? Are there the people who fit our target market there, which are young people, hipster types, people who like craft cocktails, and one of the challenges there is that some of the markets where that are most like that, Seattle's an example, Portland's an example, Denver's an example. They also already have really competitive craft markets, and they have a lot of local players already. So there's like over 100 distilleries in the state of Washington. So that, a bar in Seattle has their choice. So coming in as an outsider is going to be more challenging. So we started by saying we were going to be, we had a two-pronged strategy. So we had a regional expansion that was kind of to the general market. And then we would have targeted national expansion to get into those hip city spots. And what we found is that it's just so hard to develop these relationships that instead of sort of really limiting ourselves, we just started having a whole bunch of conversations at once in the hopes that some of them will eventually yield fruit. So we're looking right now at a mixture of sort of target states and general states. We expanded into Pennsylvania because a great distributor came to us with a good strategy and said, we want to sell this. So we said, well, we hadn't thought about Pennsylvania, but okay. And they've done a good job selling it there.
Yeah, so basically based on our Chicago experience, which we are still struggling with, we had changed our approach to thinking about expansion to be more focused on the distributor, because if you find a distributor that is strategic and that has a motivated sales force and is good at communicating and understands their market, you can leverage that distributor a lot better than you can if you're with a distributor that doesn't care, even if they're in a big market.
I noticed you were in Trader Joe's. Is that a different distribution model? And does that align really well with your values?
So the big chains, they still have to buy from a distributor because they're considered a retailer. And so they still buy from our distributor. But those chains are attractive to people like us because if you get into one Trader Joe's and it does well, then they have, an overarching structure where they might say, hey, let's get you into the rest of our stores. Mm-hmm. In Chicago, one of the things we're working really hard on, we only have a little bit of bandwidth to do anything down there because, we got people mostly here trying to serve the other states. And so we basically made again, sort of a 3-part strategy there. So one was Binny's, which is the sort of big high-end liquor store. We said, let's get into Binny's. One was Whole Foods. Whole Foods in Illinois has like a little fancy spirit section. It's really cool. It's the kind of company we like to be in on the shelf. We said, let's get into Whole Foods, and then let's get into a few of the fancy cocktail bars. So that's how we're using our energy. Even though so far it's not generating a lot of sales, it's kind of a strategic way of getting started while we wait to figure out how we can get the distributor to do some work for us. Yeah.
It's a little different question from
Yeah.
what we're talking, but like when there's a high conflict of interest in business,
Mm-hmm.
what makes you want to stay being a socially responsible company, and where does your strengths to stay and your values come from?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's been an interesting thing, I think, for both of us being in business and coming from kind of worlds where conflicts of interest look very different. And, in that people, planet, and profit piece, the profit is there. And I also have to remind myself sometimes, like, you can actually often do more for the planet and the people if you have some profit. And so, but it is a very personal value for us, and it's not necessarily always easy when you get pulled in those different directions. And definitely being in this industry, it is an industry that's rife with conflicts of interest. And certainly in Minnesota, our distributor somehow legally has found loopholes, and so they do have kind of their own house brands of spirits. And they sometimes use actual craft spirits to push sales of their spirits. And so you're trying to figure out, how do you keep motivating a distributor to push your product when they're really using it to sell their product, but you still need them. You can't just be like, screw you, I don't even need you, I'm going to sell directly, because that's not legal. And I don't know that we have a good answer. It's kind of a continuing dance thinking about it. And I think one of the biggest things is just creating a frequent opportunity to come back and consider your values and to keep those front of mind, and also to model those to your employees so that they're thinking about them and you're engaging them in conversations about it so that they know what your thinking is and can apply that value system to their work.
It's also not black or white or either or. An example is salaries, right? So all the folks who work full-time for us, they're on salary and they have benefits. And we pay them what we can afford to pay them, which is it's okay. For Duluth, they're pretty good salaries. But, our folks are not living lives of, luxury. And we would like them to, we'd like to be able to pay them an awesome salary and get all the benefits. And, right now, we have health insurance, but it's a high deductible. And because, remember I talked about how we align our incentives? We have the same stupid high deductible plan. But we can't afford to get a low deductible plan. And so, we value people, but we're having to do a balancing act where it's we want to do the best we can by our staff, but also we don't have all the money in the world. So where's the line right now? And coming back to look at it is important. But that turns out to be true of a lot of these decisions where, there's a gradient, there's different competing values you have to balance. And that's one of the reasons it's so important to articulate your values and try and make them drive incentives, be serious. Because otherwise, when push comes to shove, profit always wins.
How many employees do you have? And could you, instead of higher salaries, could you offer just a profit sharing kind of gain sharing plan to, make up some of the compensation?
Yeah, we have 11 full-time, and then we have
almost 15
about 15
part-time
folks who work in the bar. on hourly. And we've thought about all those things, and one of the things that we value is pay equity. So, in America in general, like within the same business, you walk down the hall and one person's making 5 times as much as the other person. We don't do that. So everyone, even regardless of education level, is right around the same number. So we try and keep it equitable that way. But then in terms of providing incentives, we've thought about profit sharing programs. But because of the way we started it and giving up, half the company and making everyone the same, right now we don't have a mechanism to do that. So we've thought about it, but we're, yeah.
I think, and probably in a lot of companies, that type of equity or the lower salaries can be a struggle then for hiring talented people or retaining people. And so then as a small company, you're working under that type of structure. You have to think about what are the other rewards that people want and that feed people, because pay is one thing, but it's not everything, and especially depending on like where you live or how much the cost of living is in a place. But even if the cost of living is high, if your salary is adequate to that place, what are the other things that are rewarding for being in a business? And that is part of what underlies kind of the culture that we've tried to create of people being really valued for who they are. We have a culture of people bringing their whole selves to work, and we really try to foster opportunities for any of our staff to use like all of their skill sets and to bring their passion into what they're doing and take ownership over various parts of their work, and really treat them like family, do fun things with them, look for rewards that aren't financial.
Yeah, one of the things I know when I was working for a larger organization, there was my job description, which I'd convinced them I was going to be good at. And then there was the rest of me, and I had a lot of skills that weren't in the job description, and there are also some things in the job description that I was bad at. But it was like, that was locked. So they couldn't see me outside of that, here's what you said you were going to do, this is what you're going to do. And we know that that's not how people are. We might hire somebody to be a salesperson, but then we find out as we get to know them better, like, oh, they're really great at building things, or they're a great artist, or, they're awesome at flavor. And so we might say, hey, you want to learn how to do this other thing? And so we try and, you have a role that you need to fill, but then we try and be flexible so that the person is kind of living their fullest self at work. And then even if we have to shuffle other people around, we end up having people who are doing what they're good at and happy doing what they're doing. And so we end up with a better result.
This might be one or two questions. It seems like there were some constraints with trying to get into a distributorship to get your product out there. Is a lot of these constraints, are they as a result of ATF rules or just the good old boy club, or both? And is there any legislation that might be for independent small craft people that might help you? Because it seems like that's a big factor in this.
Yeah.
I would say it's a combination of all those things.
Right.
The ATF and like AGE and TTB, all of that regulatory structure that's set up is definitely skewed towards helping the distributors. And part of that is also kind of post-prohibition ruling, where they were protecting the distributors from really large beer companies who people were worried were going to control the whole alcohol distribution scene across the country. But there also is definitely, it's partly like market and how many distilleries there are now, and also the habits that the distributors are in of how they sell things, how they look at products. Craft is still pretty new for the way they think about selling products and the value proposition of a product. So like we were saying, people are used to basically pay to play. And so they're used to working with big companies that give away a lot of products, that give away trips to Cancun, that give away all sorts of giant displays and things like that, and swag bags and everything to get you to take their product and then put their product on the market. And craft players just can't compete with that. So we're starting to look at sort of a David and Goliath situation, try to figure out what is our version of the slingshot and how do you get in with a different set of strengths.
Yeah, we have had some success at the Minnesota legislature. So we helped get the law passed that allowed us to do sampling, and then we helped get a law passed the following year that allowed us to have a cocktail room, and then we got a law passed the following year that allowed us to sell one small bottle per person per day. Yeah, it's true that with craft beer, those exceptions have been a big part of their success. And one thing they've had that we don't have on kind of a national level is that they're usually allowed to distribute themselves. So, if you bent paddle, they don't do it anymore, but when they started, they had a delivery van, and they did all the deliveries, and so they saved themselves a bunch of money that way versus having to give the distributor a cut of it. It's the least fun part of this business. When we were very, very starting, the least fun part was all the regulations, because there's just a whole bunch of agencies, both federal, state, and local, that want to regulate us, and we have to keep them all happy. And it's almost insane how many forms there are to fill out every month. So
There
at the
could be a little
beginning, that was the
streamlining.
worst part, and now I think the worst part is trying to build these relationships with the distributors, because we're little, and if they can sell Bacardi, where you just got to show up to a liquor store and say, how much Bacardi do you want? You don't have to tell them about it. You don't have to convince them. You don't have to give them a taste. Everybody knows what Bacardi is already, and it will sell a lot because it's a national brand. So for little folks like us, that's just a hard nut to crack.
And perhaps you have, but have you looked at benchmarks in other industry that have similar challenges? For instance, I work in healthcare and pharmaceuticals. Was one where you go up and say, how much Lantus do you want? But if you go up and ask them how much of some orphan drug do they want, no, we're not buying. But they have found solutions. I don't know that I can name one because that's not my area. But it's obvious that these orphans do find a way to market in a meaningful way. Not that craft distilleries are an orphan. You have a bigger footprint than that. But it's an example of start thinking.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I have a sort of strategic. I take strategic exception to benchmarking as a general rule, and the reason I do is when somebody says, "Let's benchmark this," and they go, what benchmarking is you find out what everyone else is doing. So like, if you say, "All right, we're going to have a project manager. What do project managers make in our industry in our town?" Oh, it's $35,000. Great. So let's set the salary range from 30 to 40 and see who can get. And people do that in a lot of ways. Like, how does everyone else sell this product? What kind of efficiency does everyone else get? And it leads to like a regression to the mean where everyone's sort of doing the thing that everyone else is doing. I also dislike, on the subject of things I dislike, the term best practices. Well, yeah, obviously you should be doing at least as well as everyone else. But if you say, let's just do the best practice, that's like, let's do the same thing everyone else is doing and not try and do better than that. Anyway, that's a rant to end.
But looking cross industries is a good idea.
Little different question. How do you balance work, family? What tips would you have for students?
What?
I wouldn't say balance is something we're pursuing.
Pursuing passion in all areas. Yeah, I think balance. I think balance is kind of a false dream to chase in some ways, or you can just figure out what it means to you. And I don't think that a particular like work-life, work-family balance should be the same thing for everyone. But we do have a young child. We are married and working together. And so it is something that is a daily obvious thing to be balancing and thinking about. And so we've taken in one of our models in this respect is kind of like the Patagonia approach, where like you can bring your kid to work if you need to. Having a kid, we kind of always put our kid first as much as possible, and so we put our employees' kids first also. As long as people are getting their jobs done, like we're fine if there are 3-year-olds in our office, or if you need to go to the school pageant.
School pageant.
I know, schools do pageants.
Is that a thing that happens?
But, and making sure that there is time for people to pursue hobbies and things like that. At the same time, it's not like easy. It's not like we feel like we have lots of time, or like we have anything to talk about that isn't work. So, I think what does help is, we're doing something that is exciting and that we love. And so it doesn't feel like as much of a strain or like it needs as strict of a separation.
It's also not that important. We're just making liquor. It's not like we're, saving the world. So I don't feel bad if I go home about, not working all night. And so we often remind our staff that also, like, take a vacation. It's not that important. I wish I had known that when I was doing nonprofit stuff. I wish I'd had more perspective on the role I could play. I'm like, it matters. Yeah, it's important, but I'm not going to personally save the entire world myself. Maybe I should take the night off. Yeah.
Because you're going to get less done if you burn out than if you work a little bit less for longer.
Yeah, you're going to give up and go start an alcohol company.
To kind of piggyback on that a little bit, I'm curious selfishly because I'm starting a business with my husband too. So I'm wondering, what are some of the really positive things about being married to your business partner, and maybe some struggles that you guys have had?
I think one of the positive things is that we have pretty different skill sets. I'm more like research, gathering information, and very flavor writing focused. And Joel is more like strategic planning and thinking, and then also like builds everything focused. And so it's a way of us like using our separate skill sets, and we both trust each other's skill sets to take care of the areas that we work on. But at the same time, I think the stuff that we do together is actually the most fun, and we really value being able to work together when we are like solving the big problems or really brainstorming or building something together. It's time that we really enjoy in retrospect. Not always in the moment. I think we always try to keep in mind like both people care about the other person, want this to succeed. We're on the same team, even if like sometimes their tone of voice gets a little snappy or we disagree about precisely the way we should approach something. But we really believe in dialogue, and that goes for our relationship. It goes for our relationship with our employees. And so, I don't know, we can talk through anything.
It's true. It's also helpful to occasionally spend some time together where you're not thinking about work. Which is actually harder than you'd think in the alcohol business, because if you try to go out for fun, you end up talking to people about your product, and it's like, could we go on a date where we're not selling liquor sometime?
What would you say is the most rewarding part of this whole experience for you?
Have any of you guys read Wendell Berry? You should go read Wendell Berry. Wendell Berry is a sort of farmer essayist, and he talks a lot about what it means to live in a place and be part of a community and do something tangible. And for me, that's been the most rewarding part. Is at the end of the day, you get to watch those cases, roll out into the truck on a pallet, and know that you did something you can see.
Yeah, I'm piggybacking off of that. I think the coming back to the place thing, we really wanted to root in a place and be part of a community. And I think that has been the case, kind of exceeding our expectations. The community has really embraced what we're doing, and we've had so much support from the community, and in turn we've been able to be really involved in the community. And it's been a really interesting experience for me, certainly. When you're an academic, you think like your academic opinion is very important, and then when you're an entrepreneur, you discover like even more people want your opinion, and so you wind up in all sorts of speaking situations where you're like, I'm not sure I'm qualified for this, but I'm glad to be involved. And so it really, having that opportunity to meet people in the community, connect with the community, and be part of it has been really, really rewarding.
Good time for one more.
Well, just my students are wondering if you were going to be bringing any free samples.
We weren't sure about the age range of people that were going to be here.
How about this? If you are of age and you come down to the distillery and tell them you were here, we'll give you a free cocktail.
Wow.
It has to be a real ID, though.
Yeah.
Not a fake ID.
You have to have a password. Shibboleth.
Yes.
Great. Joel and Emily, thanks.